You came to end my career. I came to end your dynasty.
The soap suds were still dripping from my hands when Marjorie Sellers delivered the ending blow. You were always the weak one, Jack. I stood there in the parking lot of Murphy's Car Wash, wearing a stained uniform that read Jack in faded blue letters, watching my former mother-in-law step out of her pristine Mercedes. The woman who once called me son now looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her designer shoe. Mrs. Sellers, I said, forcing what I hoped passed for a smile, didn't expect to see you here. I'm sure you didn't. Her voice carried that familiar, ice-cold disdain that had frozen many a boardroom. Though I suppose this is exactly where you belong now. 5 years ago, I was Jack Crane, CEO of Sellers Crane Industries. I had a corner office on the 42nd floor, a 7-figure salary, in the respect of everyone in this Rust Belt city. I built that company from the ground up, turning Edmund Sellers' failing manufacturing business into a billion-dollar empire. Now, I was Jack the car wash guy, making $12 an hour plus tips. How's Lila? I asked, because apparently I enjoyed torturing myself. Marjorie's smile could have frozen hell. Thriving. She's finally free to reach her full potential without... She gestured vaguely at my soap-covered uniform. Dead weight holding her back. Dead weight. That's what 10 years of marriage had been reduced to. 10 years of building something together, of late nights and early mornings, of dreams shared over coffee and champagne. Dead weight. Well, I said, wringing out my rag with perhaps more force than necessary. Give her my best. I don't think that would be appropriate. Marjorie opened her car door, then paused. Oh, and Jack? Travis sends his regards. He's been such a comfort to Lila during this difficult transition. Travis Holt, my former protege, the ambitious young executive I'd mentored, promoted, and trusted, the man who was now warming my ex-wife's bed and sitting in my old office. If I was any weaker, I'd be a ghost. How's that for family spirit? Marjorie drove away, leaving me standing in a puddle of dirty water, watching her taillights disappear into the afternoon traffic. Around me, the sounds of the car wash continued, the hiss of pressure washers, the rumble of the conveyor belt, the chatter of my coworkers who pretended not to have heard every word of that humiliating exchange. Rough day, boss? I turned to find Danny Murphy, the owner's son, approaching with a sympathetic expression. Danny was 22, fresh out of college, and working here temporarily while he figured out his life. He treated me with the kind of respectful curiosity usually reserved for war veterans or recovering dependent people. Just another satisfied customer, I said. That was your ex-mother-in-law, right? The one who... Yeah. I didn't need to hear the story again. Everyone in town knew it. How Jack Crane had been systematically outmaneuvered by his own wife and her family. How they'd used his trust against him, convinced him to sign over controlling interest in the company for tax purposes. How they'd called an emergency board meeting the next day and voted him out as CEO. How they'd frozen his assets, tied up his stock options in litigation, and left him with nothing but a 10-year-old pickup truck and a bruised ego. The local business journal had called it the fall of the House of Crane. Very poetic. Very devastating. You know what I don't get? Danny said, grabbing a spray bottle and joining me at the next car. How they could just take everything like that. Doesn't seem legal. It was legal, I said. Barely, but legal. When you trust people, you don't read the fine print as carefully as you should. But didn't you own part of the company? Still do, technically. Some shares that are tied up in legal proceedings. Probably worthless by now. I shrugged, focusing on scrubbing a particularly stubborn spot on the car's bumper. Water under the bridge. That's when Harold Westbrook stepped out of the sedan I was cleaning. I hadn't recognized the car. Harold had always driven a Cadillac when he was on the board of directors. But there he was, my former colleague, looking uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed. Jack, he said quietly, I didn't know you worked here. Harold. I straightened up, suddenly very aware of my stained uniform and the smell of industrial soap clinging to my clothes. How's retirement treating you? Good, good. He glanced around nervously. Listen, could we talk privately? I followed him to a quiet corner of the parking lot, my curiosity piqued. Harold Westbrook had been Edmund Sellers' oldest friend and most trusted advisor. He'd voted with the family when they ousted me, but he'd looked sick doing it. I've been meaning to call you, he said. There are some things you should know about your shares. What about them? Harold looked around again, as if expecting corporate spies to emerge from behind the dumpster. They're not worthless, Jack. Far from it. The company's been doing well. Very well. Those shares you still own, they're worth about $5.7 million. I almost dropped the keys I was holding. What? The legal team has been stalling the proceedings, hoping you'd give up and settle for pennies. But if you pushed it, if you got the right lawyer, Harold shook his head. They've been lying to you, son. You've got leverage you never knew about. My mind raced. $5.7 million. Enough to start over, enough to fight back, enough to remind everyone in this town exactly who the weak one really was. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Harold's expression hardened. Because what they did to you was wrong, and because, he hesitated, because I think it's about to get worse. There are rumors, Jack, about Lila and Travis, about what they're planning next. What kind of rumors? But Harold was already walking back to his car. Get yourself a good lawyer, Jack, and watch your back. The game isn't over yet. As I watched him drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of a drowning man, but the cold, calculating hope of someone who'd just been handed a weapon. Marjorie Sellers thought I was weak. My ex-wife thought I was finished. Travis Holt thought he'd won. They were all about to learn how wrong they were. The law office of Catherine Martinez occupied the top floor of the Hartwell building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. From up here, I could see the Sellers Crane Industries headquarters, its glass and steel facade gleaming in the morning sun like a middle finger pointed directly at me. $5.7 million, Catherine said, reviewing the documents spread across her mahogany desk. Harold was right. Your shares have appreciated significantly since the company went public last year. Catherine Martinez was the kind of lawyer other lawyers whispered about in courthouse hallways. Sharp, ruthless, and expensive as hell. She'd built her reputation destroying powerful men who underestimated her, which made her perfect for what I had in mind. So I can force them to buy me out? You could, but that would be the boring option. Catherine leaned back in her leather chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Tell me, Jack, what exactly do you want? Justice, money, or revenge? What's the difference? Justice is getting what you're owed. Money is getting what you're worth. Revenge is getting what they deserve. She tapped her pen against the desk. I specialize in the third option. I thought about Marjorie's sneer, Lila's betrayal, Travis sitting in my old office. Revenge sounds about right. Good. Because I've been doing some digging, and your ex-wife and her boyfriend have been very busy little bees. Catherine opened another file. Travis Holt has been using his position to steer contracts to companies owned by his family. Nothing technically illegal, but ethically questionable. Lila's been having an affair with him for over a year. Started while you were still married. And there are rumors about some creative accounting in the charity division. Rumors? The Sellers Family Foundation. They've been claiming tax deductions for charitable contributions that seem to benefit their own properties. Again, probably legal, but it would make for interesting reading in the business section of the newspaper. I felt a familiar stirring in my chest, the same feeling I used to get when I spotted a weakness in a competitor's strategy. What do you need from me? Time, money, and a strong stomach. This is going to get ugly before it gets beautiful. Catherine's smile widened. But first, you need a job. Can't wage war from a car wash. That's how I found myself walking into the offices of Hartwell Industries 3 days later wearing my first suit in 6 months. The company was a mid-sized manufacturing firm that had been trying to break into the aerospace market for years. Their CEO, Robert Hartwell, was Harold Westbrook's nephew and one of the few people in town who'd publicly criticized my ouster. Jack Crane, Robert said, standing up from behind his desk as I entered his office. I was hoping Harold was right about you being ready to get back in the game. Depends on the game, I said, shaking his hand. Aerospace contracts, government work, the kind of business that Sellers Crane has been monopolizing for the past 5 years. Robert gestured to a chair. I need someone who understands their operation from the inside, someone who knows where the bodies are buried. I helped bury most of them. Perfect. When can you start? The next morning, I was back in a corner office. Not as nice as my old one, but with a view of the city and the secretary who called me Mr. Crane instead of hey, you. It felt like putting on clothes that almost fit. My first order of business was reconnaissance. I needed to know what Lila and Travis were up to, what vulnerabilities they might have, and how best to exploit them. In the old days, I would have just called and asked. Now I had to be more creative. That's where Mickey Torino came in. Mickey owned the auto shop where I'd been taking my truck for repairs. He was also a former cop who'd left the force under questionable circumstances and now made ends meet by doing security consulting for local businesses. In other words, he was exactly the kind of morally flexible professional I needed. You want me to follow your ex-wife? Mickey asked, looking up from the engine he was working on. His hands were black with grease, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. I want you to observe, document, report back. I handed him an envelope containing $500 in cash. Nothing illegal, just information gathering. Mickey wiped his hands on a rag and pocketed the money. What kind of information? Where she goes, who she meets, what she talks about when she thinks nobody's listening. I paused. Especially when she's with Travis Holt. The pretty boy in the expensive suits? Yeah, I know the type. Mickey grinned. This is going to be fun. While Mickey handled surveillance, I focused on the business side of my revenge. Hartwell Industries had been trying to land a contract with Morrison Aerospace for 3 years. Sellers Crane had been blocking them at every turn, using their government connections and superior resources to maintain their monopoly. But I knew something they didn't. Morrison's CEO, Patricia Chen, was getting tired of dealing with Travis Holt's arrogance. I'd heard through the grapevine that Travis had made some inappropriate comments at a recent industry conference, and Patricia was looking for an excuse to take her business elsewhere. I called her office and was surprised when she agreed to meet with me personally. Jack Crane, she said as I entered her office the following week. I heard you were washing cars for a living. I was. Now I'm back to washing dirty money instead of dirty windshields. The joke fell flat, but Patricia smiled politely. I wanted to talk to you about the Morrison account. You mean the account that Sellers Crane has locked up for the next 5 years? I mean the account that they're going to lose when Travis Holt's behavior becomes public knowledge. I slid a folder across her desk. Take a look. The folder contained photos Mickey had taken of Travis at various bars and restaurants around the city. Nothing illegal, but plenty that would make a corporate executive look unprofessional. Travis, drinking heavily at lunch meetings. Travis making crude gestures while talking to young female employees. Travis passed out in his car in the company parking lot. Where did you get these? Patricia asked, flipping through the photos. Let's just say Travis isn't as careful as he thinks he is. I leaned forward. The question is, do you really want to do business with someone like that? Patricia studied the photos for a long moment, then looked up at me. What are you proposing? Give Hartwell Industries a chance to bid on your next project. We'll beat Sellers Crane's price by 10% and deliver 2 weeks early. I stood up. And you'll never have to deal with Travis Holt's wandering hands or his bourbon breath again. I'll consider it. That was corporate speak for, yes, but I need plausible deniability. I'd take it. On my way out of Morrison Aerospace, I called Mickey. Any news? Oh, do I have news? Mickey said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Your ex-wife and her boyfriend have been very busy and very sloppy. How sloppy? Meet me at Flanagan's tonight at 8. Bring your appetite for drama. Flanagan's was the kind of dive bar where off-duty cops and ex-cons could drink in peace without worrying about running into their parole officers or their ex-wives. It was dark, loud, and anonymous. Perfect for the kind of conversation Mickey and I needed to have. They're planning something big, Mickey said, sliding a manila envelope across the sticky table. I followed them to 3 different meetings this week. Lawyers, accountants, some guy who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. I opened the envelope and found photographs of Lila and Travis entering and leaving various office buildings, along with typed notes detailing times, locations, and license plate numbers of other attendees. What kind of meetings? The hostile takeover kind. Mickey took a swig of his beer. Near as I can figure, they're planning to buy out Hartwell Industries. Probably think they can force you out of another job and leave you with nowhere to go. I stared at the photos, feeling a familiar rage building in my chest. They weren't content with destroying me once. They wanted to make sure I never got back up. There's more, Mickey continued. I got close enough to hear part of a conversation between your ex and her mother. Something about finishing what we started and making sure he never bothers us again. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know, but it didn't sound friendly. Mickey finished his beer and signaled for another. You want my advice? Hit them first. Hit them hard. Don't give them a chance to see it coming. I looked at the photos again, my mind already working through possibilities. Lila and Travis thought they were being clever, plotting my destruction while I washed cars and licked my wounds. They had no idea that I was 3 steps ahead of them. Mickey, I said, how would you like to make some real money? I'm listening. I need you to do more than just watch. I need you to act. I leaned across the table. Think you can handle that? Mickey's grin was all the answer I needed. The Morrison Aerospace contract was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically began dismantling everything Lila and Travis had built on the foundation of my betrayal. Every connection I'd made during my years as CEO, every favor I was owed, every piece of inside information I possessed, I weaponized all of it. The first domino fell when Patricia Chen announced that Morrison Aerospace was switching to Hartwell Industries for their next 3 projects. The local business journal ran a small item about it, buried on page 6. But in our insular corporate community, it might as well have been front-page news. The second domino was bigger. You magnificent coward, Robert Hartwell said, bursting into my office with a bottle of champagne and a grin that could be seen from space. Kellerman Industries just called. They want to meet about moving their account. Kellerman was Sellers Crane's second largest client, worth about $8 million annually. I'd brought them into the fold 4 years ago, back when their CEO was struggling with a messy divorce and needed someone who understood what it felt like to have your life torn apart by people you trusted. What did you tell them? I asked. That we'd be delighted to discuss their needs. The meeting's tomorrow at 2. Robert popped the champagne cork, sending foam cascading onto my carpet. How the hell did you make this happen? I reminded them that loyalty is a two-way street, and that some streets have better scenery than others. What I didn't tell Robert was that I'd also reminded Kellerman's CEO about certain compromising photos that Travis had been showing around at the country club. Photos of the man's ex-wife that had been taken without her knowledge or consent. Nothing I could prove in court, but enough to make a decent man very, very angry. The third domino was personal. Mickey had been busy following Lila and Travis around town, documenting their increasingly reckless behavior. What started as surveillance had evolved into something more aggressive. Travis's BMW had developed a mysterious tendency to break down at inconvenient moments. His dry cleaning kept getting lost. His favorite restaurants seemed to have trouble with their reservation system whenever he called. You're playing with fire, Catherine warned me during one of our weekly strategy sessions. This kind of harassment could backfire. It's not harassment, I said. It's karma with a GPS tracker. But Catherine was right to be concerned. I was walking a fine line between justice and vendetta, and the line was getting blurrier every day. The problem was, it felt too good to stop. The fourth domino almost took out the whole game. I was working late in my office when my secretary buzzed me. Mr. Crane, there's a Lila Sellers here to see you. She says it's urgent. My ex-wife hadn't spoken to me in over a year. The fact that she was here, in my new office, using her maiden name, meant something had gone very wrong with her world. Send her in. Lila walked through my door like she owned the building, but I could see the cracks in her armor. Her usually perfect hair was slightly mussed. Her designer suit was wrinkled. Most tellingly, her hands were shaking. Hello, Jack. Lila. I didn't stand up or offer her a chair. To what do I owe the pleasure? You know why I'm here? She sat down anyway, crossing her legs and trying to project the confidence that had once intimidated boardrooms full of men twice her age. This has to stop. What has to stop? Don't play dumb. The contract thefts, the sabotage, the stalking. Her voice rose slightly on the last word. Travis is talking about getting a restraining order. I almost laughed. Travis thinks I'm stalking him? That's flattering, but I've got better things to do with my time. We know it's you, Jack. Who else would have access to our client list? Who else would know exactly which pressure points to hit? Maybe your clients are just tired of dealing with an arrogant drunk and his enabler. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the way her face flushed with anger. Maybe they remember when this company actually stood for something besides nepotism and cheating. That's rich coming from someone who's been reduced to industrial espionage and petty vandalism. Industrial espionage? I raised an eyebrow. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof. Lila's jaw tightened. She'd always hated when I called her bluff, and she was bluffing now. They suspected me, but they couldn't prove anything because I'd been very careful to keep my hands technically clean. I want to make a deal, she said finally. I'm listening. Stop whatever you're doing, and we'll settle your stock dispute. Fair market value, no legal fees, clean break. She leaned forward. You can take your money and disappear. Start over somewhere else. Isn't that what you really want? What I really wanted was to watch her empire crumble the same way she'd watched mine fall. What I really wanted was to see Travis Holt crying in a parking lot, begging for mercy he'd never shown me. What I really wanted was for Marjorie Sellers to know what it felt like to be called weak. But what I said was, I'll think about it. Lila stood up, smoothing her skirt. Don't think too long, Jack. The situation is escalating and you might not like where it ends up. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who used to care about you. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city lights and thinking about her offer. $5.7 million was enough to start over anywhere in the world. I could buy a house on the beach, open a small business, find a nice woman who didn't know about my past failures. I could be happy. But happiness wasn't what I wanted anymore. What I wanted was justice. What I wanted was revenge. What I wanted was for everyone in this town to know that Jack Crane wasn't weak, wasn't finished, and wasn't going anywhere. I picked up my phone and called Mickey. Time for phase 2, I said when he answered. What's phase 2? We stopped playing defense. The next morning, Travis Holt arrived at his office to find his reserved parking space occupied by a rusty pickup truck with a bumper sticker that read, "My other car is your wife." Security had the truck towed, but not before half the employees in the building had seen it and started talking. That afternoon, someone leaked a story to the Business Journal about Travis's drinking problem, complete with photos of him stumbling out of various downtown bars. The article was carefully worded to avoid libel, but the implication was clear. Sellers Crane Industries was being run by someone with serious personal problems. That evening, Lila received an anonymous package containing copies of all the love letters she'd written to Travis during their affair, along with a note suggesting that her husband might find them interesting reading. Of course, her husband was me, and I'd already read them, but she didn't know that. By the end of the week, the local gossip mill was churning at maximum capacity. Everyone was talking about the drama at Sellers Crane, the mysterious campaign against Travis Holt, and the possible return of Jack Crane to the local business scene. You're making them paranoid, Catherine observed during our Friday meeting. Paranoid people make mistakes. That's the idea. Just remember, Jack, when you're hunting monsters, be careful you don't become one yourself. I thought about that warning as I drove home that night. Was I becoming a monster? Or was I simply becoming what I needed to be to survive in a world where nice guys finished last and weak men got crushed? My phone buzzed with a text from Mickey. Package delivered. Fireworks start tomorrow. The package contained copies of financial records showing how Travis had been steering contracts to his family's companies. Nothing illegal, but ethically questionable enough to cause serious problems if it became public knowledge. Which it would, first thing Monday morning, when the Business Journal published their front-page expose on corruption in local government contracting. I smiled as I pulled into my driveway. Lila wanted me to disappear, to take my money and fade away like a bad memory. But I wasn't the same man who'd been blindsided by her betrayal. I was harder now, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. The weak Jack Crane was dead. What had taken his place was something much worse. Something that was just getting started. The Business Journal's expose hit like a nuclear bomb. Corruption scandal rocks local contractor, screamed the headline, accompanied by a photo of Travis looking disheveled outside a downtown bar. The article detailed how he'd been steering millions of dollars in government contracts to companies owned by his relatives, creating a web of financial relationships that, while technically legal, reeked of corruption and nepotism. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing off the hook. Reporters wanting comments, competitors smelling blood in the water, government officials promising thorough investigations. By noon, 3 more clients had called Hartwell Industries asking about switching their accounts. By 5 p.m., Travis Holt had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. "You beautiful, vindictive genius," Robert Hartwell said, practically dancing into my office with the evening edition of the paper. Sellers Crane's stock dropped 12% today. 12%! I tried to look surprised. Really? That's unfortunate. Unfortunate, my buttocks. This is the best thing that's happened to this company in 20 years. Robert threw himself into a chair. How long do you think before they fire him? Depends on how much damage control they can do, and whether any more skeletons fall out of the closet. There would be more skeletons. Mickey had been very thorough in his investigation, and Travis Holt was the gift that kept on giving. Expense account fraud. Related to Zek's harassment complaints that had been quietly settled. A drunk driving incident that had been covered up with family money. All of it carefully documented. All of it ready to be leaked at strategic moments. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The call came at 7:30 that evening, just as I was settling down with a beer and the satisfaction of a day's work well done. "Jack, it's Harold Westbrook. We need to talk." "Tonight!" Harold's voice was strained, almost panicked. This was a man who'd survived 40 years in corporate boardrooms without losing his cool, and he sounded terrified. "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at the Riverside Diner in an hour. And Jack, watch your back. Things are about to get very complicated." The Riverside Diner was a 24-hour greasy spoon on the edge of town, the kind of place where truckers and insomniacs went to pretend they weren't alone in the world. Harold was waiting in a corner booth, looking like he'd aged 10 years since our last conversation. "They know," he said without preamble as I slid into the seat across from him. "Know what?" "That you're behind the leaks, the surveillance, all of it." Harold's hands were shaking as he reached for his coffee cup. "Lila hired a private investigator. They've been watching you watch them." I felt ice water in my veins. "How much do they know?" "Enough. They have photos of you meeting with Mickey Torino. They know about the Morrison contract, the Kellerman deal, probably half a dozen other things." Harold leaned forward. "Jack, they're not just going to fire Travis and cut their losses. They're going to destroy you. Completely. Let them try." "You don't understand. This isn't about business anymore. This is personal." Lila is talking about criminal charges, harassment, stalking, industrial espionage. Harold's voice dropped to a whisper. "She wants you in prison, Jack. She wants you gone forever." I sat back, processing this information. I'd known my campaign of revenge would eventually provoke a response, but I'd underestimated how far Lila would go to protect herself and Travis. "There's something else," Harold continued. "Something you need to know about your stock holdings." "What about them?" "The legal proceedings that have been tying up your shares? They're not legitimate. The company's been manipulating the system, paying off judges, falsifying documents." Harold pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. "I've been collecting evidence for months. If this gets out, it won't just destroy Lila and Travis. It'll bring down the whole company, including your shares." I opened the envelope and found photocopies of legal documents, bank records, and email exchanges. The evidence was damning. A systematic conspiracy to defraud me of my rightful ownership in the company I'd built. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because in about 6 hours, they're going to have you arrested on trumped-up charges. They've been building a case against you for weeks, planting evidence, bribing witnesses." Harold's voice was barely audible now. "You've got maybe one chance to turn this around, but it's going to require you to risk everything." "What kind of chance?" "Tomorrow morning, there's an emergency board meeting. They're going to vote Travis back in as CEO and authorize criminal charges against you. But if you could get into that boardroom, if you could present this evidence before they vote, they'd never let me in the building. They would if you were accompanied by federal agents." I stared at Harold, understanding dawning. "You want me to go to the FBI? I want you to save yourself. And maybe, just maybe, get the justice you deserve." Harold stood up, leaving a 20 on the table. "But whatever you're going to do, you need to do it tonight. By tomorrow morning, it'll be too late." After Harold left, I sat in the diner for another hour, staring at the evidence and thinking about my options. I could run, take what money I had, and disappear before Lila's trap closed around me. I could fight, go to the FBI with Harold's evidence and hope they could move fast enough to save me. Or I could do what Jack Crane would have done a year ago, before betrayal and humiliation had turned him into someone harder and more dangerous. I could finish what I'd started. I called Mickey from the diner's parking lot. "We've got a problem," I said when he answered. "They know about the surveillance." "How much do they know?" "Enough to have me arrested tomorrow morning." I looked at the manila envelope in my hands. "Unless we give them something bigger to worry about." "What did you have in mind?" "Remember that charity foundation we talked about? The one with the creative accounting?" "Yeah. How would you like to help me rob it?" Mickey was quiet for a long moment. "That sounds like the kind of thing that could get us both ended." "Probably." "You in?" "Hell yes." The Sellers Family Foundation occupied a modest office building downtown, the kind of place that looked respectable enough to fool government auditors, but not so fancy as to raise questions about administrative costs. Their security system was about as sophisticated as a convenience store's, which is to say, Mickey had it disabled in under 10 minutes. "You sure about this?" he asked as we made our way through the darkened offices. "This is breaking and entering, felony stuff." "They're planning to have me arrested for crimes I didn't commit," I said, firing up the office computer. "Might as well give them something real to complain about." The computer files were even more damning than I'd hoped. The Sellers Family Foundation had been systematically looting charitable donations for years, using the money to pay for everything from Marjorie's plastic surgery to Edmund's gambling debts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that was supposed to help homeless veterans and cancer patients had been diverted to maintain the Sellers family's lifestyle. "Jesus," Mickey whispered, looking over my shoulder at the screen. "This is sick. This is leverage." I copied everything onto a flash drive, then started printing the most incriminating documents, and it's about to become very public. We were almost finished when we heard the sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot outside. "Security?" Mickey asked. I looked out the window and saw 3 black SUVs surrounding the building. Men in dark suits were getting out, moving with the kind of professional efficiency that screamed federal agents. "Not security," I said. "FBI." Mickey grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now." But it was too late. The front door burst open and a voice shouted, "Federal agents, nobody move!" I looked at Mickey, then at the flash drive in my hand, then at the window behind us. We were 3 stories up, but there was a fire escape. "Trust me?" I asked. Mickey grinned. "With my life." We went out the window just as the agents reached our floor, rappelling down the fire escape like something out of an action movie. Behind us, I could hear shouting and the sound of doors being kicked in. We hit the alley running, Mickey's car parked 2 blocks away. As we drove through the empty streets, I couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny?" Mickey asked. "I just realized something," I said, holding up the flash drive. "They didn't call the FBI on me. Harold did. He set this whole thing up to make sure I got the evidence, and they got caught red-handed. So what now? Now we finish this, once and for all." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. By 8:30, I was sitting in the lobby of Sellers Crane Industries, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would destroy everyone who'd betrayed me. I wasn't alone. Catherine Martinez sat beside me, looking like a shark who'd been chumming the water for weeks. Behind us, 2 FBI agents waited patiently, their presence lending an official gravity to the proceedings. When the elevator doors opened and Lila stepped out, her face went white. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, standing up. "Ready for that board meeting? The end."